Hi, everybody. I'm Kiely, the Lee Hills Chair in Free Press Studies here at the Missouri School of Journalism. And I am welcoming you to the first session of the Friends of the Facts Conference. We're going to be going all week with sessions about news literacy. I'm here this morning in the Reynolds Journalism Institute studios on the campus of the Missouri School of Journalism with three guests to talk a little bit about news literacy as a public policy issue. And before I introduce them, I am just going to remind everybody that you can ask questions through the chat function, and we will be keeping track of them and asking our guests, so please feel free to chime into this session. So with me today are Jason Artman. He is a teacher in Illinois, and he is involved in helping teachers there prepare for teaching news literacy or media literacy, the larger topic. Also Shawn Healy. Shawn Healy works for iCivics in Illinois, and he was involved in getting legislation passed in Illinois that requires the teaching of media literacy in public schools. And also with us is Representative Jim Murphy of the Missouri House of Representatives, and he has introduced legislation to try to do something similar in Missouri. So I want to talk a little bit about the Illinois experience and see what we can learn from that. And I'm interested in questions that Representative Murphy might have for our Illinois guests. So Shawn, I want to kick it off with you because you really were involved in getting the legislation through. So can you just talk about that process and what the bill does?
Sure. Well, so I think any successful policy campaign usually has roots that go back years, right? So this was a long game where in Illinois we built a coalition around civics and prioritized a number of different policy ideas. Ultimately, we had a state task force on civic education, which I had the honor of serving on.
So when you say we, describe who's behind this.
Yeah, so it was called the Illinois Civic Mission Coalition, and it was broad, but we made sure that we had policymakers on the coalition from the beginning, and policymakers in both political parties. Needed funders, so we had funders at the table. Certainly educators are at the heart of this work, as are students. I think the best advocates for stronger civic education, stronger media literacy policies are the kind of frontline users, right? Those are teachers and students, but yeah, it was also important to engage school leaders. So it was a very broad coalition, and we were kind of continuously working to build it and address deficits with respect to.
And about when would you say this started, and was there a spark? What was it that prompted?
Yeah, so it started in 2004, but the spark was there was this report published. Carnegie funded it in 2003 called the Campaign for the Civic Mission of Schools, and Carnegie put a little bit of money out there, and several states basically had to plot how they would implement these recommendations. One of them, by the way, was the structured engagement in teaching current and controversial issues. And ultimately, we had that written into two separate state laws, one at the high school level, one at the middle school level. So not only do we have to teach civics in Illinois, but teachers are required to engage students in conversations about current and controversial issues.
And how did this legislation come to pass?
So we had the state task force. It was our principal recommendation, and the legislators who served on that task force in the next legislative session filed that bill. It was a unique experience in that Illinois is broke financially, and so we were told if we could raise private resources to support implementation of the law, our bill sponsors would put forth a strong mandate. So we had to literally go and raise private resources from foundations, from corporate funders, to support essentially teacher training throughout the state at scale. But by the time we got in committee, I was able to go in there and say, hey, we have a funded mandate here if you pass this law. And so
how much money did you have to raise?
So my estimate, and we certainly went beyond this, but was that we needed at least $1 million a year over a 3-year period.
So there's an endowment.
Yeah, we created a fund for that purpose. And at the time, I was lucky. I was working at a foundation that was funding in the area, and we were able to go around and kind of pass the hat to other foundations. We got a couple corporate funders that came on
So this
board.
was the McCormick Foundation.
That's right. That's
which
right.
is has its roots in journalism.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Representative Murphy, do you have any questions since you're involved in this yourself?
Well, yeah, I'm really interested in the whole larger concept of the civics. Is ours is rather narrow as far as media literacy and teaching the students on how to process that information. But civics is a whole much broader subject, and I can see where that can go into a very nice area.
Right.
And,
right.
Yeah,
we should say Shawn is now working for iCivics, which is an organization founded by the late Justice Sandra Day O'Connor to address exactly that issue.
Right, because civics across the board in the country has really just been pushed aside.
Correct.
And it's bad for this society. It's
Right.
bad for this country. It's a very important issue to bring forward. My bill is more narrowly focused on the processing of media and how to process that information. But after I get over this hurdle, I probably want to talk to you
Excellent.
more.
Glad to work together.
Yeah.
No, and we see media literacy as part of a good civic
It is
education.
part of it,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with that. I often say that in a digital world where we all have access to so much information and gatekeepers really are gone, in order to be our own gatekeepers, we really need to push out some of the things we do in newsrooms all the time. So a little bit of journalism 101, how to verify sources and how to organize your information, I think would be good for everybody. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Amy Simons, does that here. We have a class for non-majors that teaches the principles of journalism, and I think it's important because people are bombarded with so much information now. How do you figure out what's real and what's not?
Yeah, and part of my take from all of the research I've done into this and the assistance I've had is that the public almost needs to be journalists at this point. They need the training that a journalist goes through on how to figure out what's real and what isn't real. And they've never had this. Our parents are trying to teach their children, but they don't have the skills to even know themselves. I mean, as we see in social media and the remarks they put up and things like that, and they believe everything. They believe absolutely everything. And if we're not teaching the new generation, it's not going to be taught because parents are not capable of doing that because they were never taught.
Do you find, I wonder if, and Jason, you might chime in here, does teaching the parent or teaching the children help the parents?
Well,
Does it engage parents in this?
I think our challenge with digital literacy, and Representative Murphy just went there, is that if you look at things, we're all pretty bad at it.
Yeah.
We're all pretty bad at, and we've got bad habits, and that extends far beyond kids. That extends to adults. It extends to historians. That really the best I've seen on how to tackle it comes from Stanford History Education Group and their Civic Online Reasoning program, which are both free online. And their study compared the way college students were looking at facts, the way historians were looking at facts, and the way professional fact checkers were looking at facts. And the only ones who were successful at discerning truth from what they were looking at were the professional fact checkers. So when you take that approach and you understand how fact checkers are checking things and you teach students to start to develop those habits, I think we've got a better chance. But in a lot of cases, we have to develop those habits ourselves and jump off to the side and see what other people say of this source instead of accepting the source because it's a written word.
Yeah, which is exactly the verification process that we do in newsrooms. It's consider the source and helping people to evaluate what is a reliable and what is not a reliable source. One of the things I often tell audiences when I'm asked to talk about this, and they say, how do I tell if a source is reliable? And one of the things I say, it seems very counterintuitive, but I say, does that site you're going to, well, first of all, does it have a page where you can find out who's behind the site? And can you reach people at the site to make a complaint or to say something was wrong? But then secondly, does the site have corrections? because what we say, what I say in my classes at the Missouri School of Journalism when I talk to up-and-coming journalists is to err is human. We really try not to make mistakes. We build in lots of procedures to try to avoid that, but we're human, so we do make mistakes. But to correct is professional. Right. So if somebody is correcting the record, that says to me that they care about their reputation and they care about the reputations of the people they cover. Because if I'm going to go back and talk to Representative Murphy again and again and again, and I misquote him, if I don't correct that record, he's going to stop talking to me. Right. So, and in fact, in journalism, we've had some celebrated cases of big news organizations having reporters fake the news. In almost every single case, that reporter was not a beat reporter, meaning not somebody who covered the same people over and over again and had to go back and ask questions. So I think that's something to look for when you're looking for a reliable source. But I think this question of how do we get those lessons across to people. Can you talk a little bit, Jason, about what you're doing as a teacher and your part of this project in Illinois?
I guess my role in Illinois starts long after Shawn was pushing for the legislation. When they put together the funding, they started building this group of Illinois Civic mentors and recruited a single teacher from every regional office of education in Illinois, which I think was 40.
Yeah,
we started
39.
Okay. And for 3 years, we were committed to getting around Illinois and spreading the word and sharing how these resources and how this funding could help teachers, to educate the teachers and take the burden off local school districts to fund the bill for that. So that's where we have a funded mandate versus non-funded mandate in Illinois comes from, is that training the teachers was going to cost, and that cost was picked up by private funds. That helped. My role was to help train those teachers, spread the word, share what we were learning, and we would spend a week in the summer getting together, and then we would host regional workshops where we were teaching what we were learning, and then we were constantly available as requested, and sometimes we were pounding on the doors begging for an audience to get out and speak about what was going on and what schools could do and what teachers can do and where they could find free resources. And that's where my role started. It's grown since then. We've developed and spun off other groups and other programs since then. After a high school bill, 3 years later, we passed a middle school bill and brought civic education to the middle schools. And now there's the digital literacy, media literacy bill as well, and we've kind of tied that all into what we're promoting and have added digital literacy. It was something we were already talking about in teaching civics. In fact, in our second summer together, we were already speaking to Stony Brook and other places that were promoting digital literacy.
Yeah, some of those folks will be on later in the week. Yeah.
And Checkology, the News Literacy Project. They appeared in our second summer conference. So we've been promoting them since then. So digital literacy was already building into what we were doing. So when our media literacy, digital literacy bill passed as well, we tacked it on and kept promoting it because it was part of what we were already doing.
Let's talk about that bill and the process of that bill, because we're really talking about two things here. There was first a bill to mandate the teaching of civics, and now added on the digital literacy bill. And since that's very similar to what the representative is promoting in our legislature here in Missouri, let's talk a little bit about that. How did that bill come about, and
so,
can you give us the history?
Sure,
Shawn?
yeah. Not a long history, but there's State Representative Elizabeth Hernandez had championed this, actually had a couple of bills. I thought the second bill was important too, which was and it's something I would recommend, having gone through a task force experience on civics. But she had a separate bill that would have created a task force on media literacy. And what I like about that is...
So that bill did not pass?
It did not,
okay.
no. What I like about that kind of bill is it gives you a sense of where we're at, maybe what other states are doing well, what the research says is best practice, and then ultimately...
Which is interesting because my original bill did just that.
Yeah.
It created this task force, And I got pushback on
Yeah.
that because nobody wants to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know task force, they're a dime a
very
dozen.
difficult
And,
to-
yeah, frankly, when we did the civics one, I was like, oh, really? We kind of know what we
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
do already.
yeah.
But the reality is you have this formal, this kind of state-sanctioned body. We went all over the state in the case of the civics one, kind of road tested our recommendations, actually got pretty good press, and that set the stage for a broader push. So, you asked me about the bill that actually passed, HB 214, which requires a unit of instruction in media literacy.
And does it say what level? Is it high school?
I think it's 612, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not necessarily tied to a single class.
Right.
So that idea that if you're teaching the skills across the curriculum, digital literacy and in all honesty, news literacy and understanding of sources, those are all cross-curricular ideas.
So that, Jason, is a really important point because last night we had dinner with Jill Villasana, who is a teacher here in Columbia, who has worked with iCivics. She's worked with the Reynolds Journalism Institute because the Reynolds Journalism Institute funded iCivics' creation of Newsfeed Defender, which is an interactive game that students can play that builds some of these skills. And her big question to you, talk about a little bit about her conversation with you last night and what her concerns were, and were you able to allay them?
Well, now the challenge we all have is trying to bring these skills as something bigger than civics. Civics isn't contained to the social studies classroom. Civic skills are people skills, right? Our job as educators and the purpose of schools is to build these civic citizens for a democracy, and those go beyond being tied to a history, American government, social studies, world history classroom. They extend into understanding everything you're reading, understanding literature, right, and dealing with people. And schools are also a great social institution for young people to learn how to fit into society. And if we're teaching those skills and we're teaching civic skills, we're teaching people how to get along with people. And I think if we look at all the things going on in the world today, that's certainly cross-curricular, right? Getting along with people and understanding people and accepting that we're going to have and we're going to encounter different views, and we've still got to share the same earth, right? We've got to share the same country, the same government system, the same everything that we're going to share. It's built on the fact that we're diverse. And you can't be diverse by tuning out those who disagree with you. You can't tune them out. You need to work with them and find something that'll.
So the bill on digital literacy passed what year?
2021.
2020. So it's very new.
Yes.
Has it been implemented yet?
I believe that this coming school
This
year.
school year.
Yeah.
This
Okay.
school year.
Yeah.
And so what have you been doing, Jason, to help prepare for that?
Well, I'll say what I said about the civics bill when we first passed it and when we first sat together in a conference room with 40 plus teachers, was that if you're teaching civics well, you're already doing what's in the bill. So I didn't have to adjust a lot of what I was doing in the classroom. I had to look at some specifics and make sure I was hitting some strategies here and there, but they were good strategies. They're appropriate for the classroom and they're appropriate cross-curricularly. So I didn't have to change a whole heck of a lot now. And then in the second year, which was what, 2017 or so, we started seeing digital literacy, and we've been promoting it since then. So for me, it almost felt natural and thank goodness we finally done it. But the task becomes to promote that for others and show others what we've been doing in the classroom. And that's a part of so many things that we're pushing in Illinois through the extension of the Illinois Civics Mission Coalition. And now we've kind of rebranded ourselves the Illinois Civics Hub. We've got a school district or a regional office in the Chicago suburbs, kind of oversees and helps us coordinate getting things out to the whole state, where we record a number. We've been doing so much digitally. We're getting back into in-person this summer, but we've recorded many seminars where people, just like this, where people can get into panels or they can meet with experts, and teachers can tune in. It's all been free, and the audience has been honestly worldwide. And all of those are archived on IllinoisCivics.org. So you can find a heck of a lot there, including digital resources, including speakers, some of the same speakers who are going to appear at this conference this week. So we've been building this massive digital library of resources that teachers can go to, and that started because everything was, we had funding to start putting things together, and we've built this network, and thanks to Shawn and many others who were a part of what he started building there in Illinois. Fortunately, that network has survived. The network has survived the initial 3-year period that things were going to be funded. Initially, it's continued to grow, and it survived. It's adjusted for the pandemic, adjusted to continue delivering information, and there's a lot out there.
So in other words, the funding has run out, but you guys are still going on, or how is that?
They actually
working?
they have another couple years of funding,
Okay.
thankfully. If I could just get to what I think is the fundamental challenge, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Jason, but as we talk about digital literacy and integrating it into the classrooms, I think there's this assumption amongst educators that because students are so comfortable with digital devices that, hey, there's nothing I can teach these guys about digital literacy because they're so much more adept with that phone than I am. But the reality is they're conflating that comfort with devices with actually the skill, as Jason said, that none of us are good at.
Yeah.
So teachers need training, frankly, on how to facilitate that.
As a non-educator, the most pushback I've gotten on a media literacy bill is from educators. I hate to say that, but the fact of the matter is they say, oh, we're already teaching that. Well, no, they're not. They're teaching how to act on the internet. They're not talking about how to process information on the internet, because they're saying you shouldn't bully somebody on the internet. They think they're teaching media literacy. Right. Well, they're not. They're just teaching behavioral skills that should be in everything in their normal life, as you say. We're already teaching that. So now all we have to do is apply it to that. Well, media literacy is a totally different thing that I'm not even sure the education system has fully grasped what it is that we're trying to do here. You had made the point that you got to look at your source. Source is not always the thing. I'll give you an example of myself. There was an instance in our capital where a group of people went over and got vaccine shots that they really weren't eligible for, but since they had a state ID, they got them. And it was a terrible thing. I mean, they really shouldn't have done that. And one of the door guards in the Capitol come to me and said, the sheriff's department people were turned away because they did that. So what did I do? I went out and I tweeted it. I said, how horrible is it that these people took shots and went for first responders? Well, the next day, the chief called me and said, it wasn't really true. Well, I retracted it. But I will guarantee you that most people still think it's true. And I was a reliable source. But I didn't have the journalism skills that you teach about going out and verifying before you do that. And a lot of that happens. It happens every day.
I think we all are victims of that. I mean,
we're
even
probably all part of the problem, too.
That is part of confirmation bias. So when we want to jump to conclusions, and the other question that we always teach in journalism school is, even if it's a reliable source, how do you know that?
Exactly.
And it doesn't mean that we're always going to get it right, but as you said, Representative, you corrected the record. And that makes you a reliable source because you're willing to admit your mistakes.
To those who saw that I corrected it.
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
But on Twitter,
but that is very, it's very difficult because, and so one of the things we talk about, and some of our speakers later in this program will talk about, is pause. Take that quick pause, and if you're not sure, not to share.
Yeah, but I would like the education world to understand that none of us totally understand this. Right. I don't care how long you've been doing it, how many studies. None of us understand this. It's a moving target.
It
and we have to come to grasp with that before we can actually correct it. Right now, I'm seeing in the education world a pushback saying, "Well, we got it. We got it. We've been doing this all along. All we had to do is put this little thing in there." Well, it's more complicated than that, because none of us totally understand it yet.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that because I think, and hear what you're hearing, Jason, because one of the things I'm going to be devil's advocate, that's what reporters do. Yeah. But one of the things I'm sure you're hearing, Representative, from teachers is I got one more thing you're going to mandate me to do. I'm mandated to teach to this test and that test and this test, and when do I get to be creative? And so how do you keep teachers from feeling like this is just one more thing that I'm required to do and I don't get paid enough?
Well, those are all true. but the fact is, if you're going to take time to, and I've said many times, it's teaching kids to think differently. And in order to teach kids to think differently, we are chasing a moving target, right? Those who are out to deceive people online know exactly what we've been teaching kids. And they've taught kids, or they've found ways to make it look like no, their source will pass that very test that exists out there, right? So some of this, so even those who are meant to be deceitful on the internet,
Okay.
they know what we've been teaching kids to do. So we do have to adapt, and that's going to be a challenge. My argument generally is that it's worth taking the time to set things up and doing it correctly. I'm with students for 18 weeks at the high school level, sometimes 36 weeks, depending on, if it's a U.S. history class and they're with us for a year, or if it's a civics class and with us for half a year, and it's worth taking the time to slow down at the beginning of the year and develop good habits in the classroom, develop an environment where people feel they can question, where students feel comfortable speaking, and then you can develop those skills over time. You're not going to develop these skills in a week, in a single lesson. It has to become something that's just part of what you do, to ask questions, to reflect, to question the source, and build from there, right? Teaching with looking at your source has been something we've been doing in history ed for a long time, right? Primary source analysis is not it seems to be a buzzword, but it's not a new concept. It's something that's been around for years. And applying a lot of those skills into civics and what's current and current event education with digital literacy will go a long way.
So we have a question from the audience. Taylor Freeman, our producer, just whispered in my ear, and that is, can you talk about the components of the news literacy module or the unit? And then maybe Representative Murphy, I'll ask you, I realize legislation can be broad, but,
right.
But maybe what's your vision of how this would work in Missouri schools? But what is involved? If I'm a teacher, what do I need to teach, and what are the pieces of this puzzle?
That part's not as clearly defined as the phrase news literacy is mentioned, and that's a lot of the key, right? Words have meaning, but words also have interpretations. So digital literacy and media literacy are about as far as it goes. It doesn't specify exactly what has to be in there. That's considerably shorter than even what's in our civics bill, but our civics bill doesn't spell out content either. Right. To the greatest extent. That's our state standards, which continue to evolve. Right. So
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I mean, they've changed a few times. They've adapted over. I've been teaching 22 years. They were brand new when I was becoming a teacher, mm-hmm. and then they've changed a few times in a few years. And maybe that part is probably where we may be doing it too fast, too often, but that's not necessarily a popular opinion in parts of Illinois. But in a lot of cases, we're just getting going on recent standards changes, and now there are some new ones that are supposed to be implemented in August that just came out. And that's going to be the hard part for people, is that when things are changing too much, too fast, it's hard to keep up.
And that's the kind of thing that gets you pushback, right? I mean, how do you sell something like this? I mean, Shawn, what's your reaction when you hear something like that?
Yeah, well, I think, and we're seeing this across the country. I don't, this is my view, not iCivics' view, I don't think legislators are all that well positioned to be in the weeds on content, on pedagogy, on how something is taught, the kind of broad parameters. And certainly we've seen this play out on both the left and the right, like prescribing very specific content. And so, yeah, in Illinois, it's been quite progressive, but it is a laundry list, right? Like the Irish potato famine, you go, it's a laundry list of things that need to be taught And similar, we're seeing
You're
on the
talking
right.
generally, not just in media literacy.
Correct. Yeah. And on the right, we're seeing all these definitions of what can't be taught, right? And it just seems like state legislatures are not school boards. Like the decisions about what's taught, how it should be taught, to me, those are local decisions. Everywhere you go in the country, they'll tell you, hey, we're a local control state. But I think legislatures are taking that away. But the broad parameters that, yes, we should teach civics, yes, we should teach media literacy,
Yeah.
to me, that's a much better place for a legislature to be. And then, yeah, with respect to standards, it's important that they be kept up to date. But yeah, the churn that we've had in Illinois, I was on the task force that wrote the new standards in 2015, and they've since, and it's confusing now, but they've since done additional revisions and aren't unfortunately resourcing implementation, which is so key. Particularly, Representative Murphy has said civics has been so marginalized, social studies has been so marginalized, we're not tested. So frankly, where is the accountability on these standards anyways? I fear that many of the best standards aren't even being implemented because there is no accountability regime.
Yeah, and in Missouri, with the tact we're taking isn't giving them any content. Mm-hmm. This isn't the idea of teaching you should believe this and you should not believe that. The whole idea between media literacy, as far as my view of it, is that it's one, critical thinking, verification, and a part that I think is even more important than anything we've ever taught is internalization of the media that they're getting. We're seeing this today with bullying in schoolyards. Used to be a bully in the schoolyard. You go out and you grab them by the ear and you take them to the principal's office. They don't do that anymore. Today, bullying happens every day on the internet. And we're not probably ever going to stop that. It's going to happen. But we have to teach our children not to internalize it. Because when they internalize it, it becomes either they become violent in retaliation, which we see in our schools, or teen suicides are up and all of those things. We need to be teaching how to process information, not what information is right or wrong. And it's not a matter of believe this, don't believe that. It's a matter of question everything. And we have to teach those skills to our children. And that's up to the educators to do it, and I'm not trying to legislate that. But I think the overall process is one that's important, and educators need to grab a hold of that idea and implement it throughout the grades, from kindergarten to 12, K-12 and beyond. But we have to get that started. And I've gotten pushback from educators, frankly, because they think they're already doing this. They're not. They're just not. And we have to give them the skills to do it. And if we had to bring in the experts to write the program, to teach the program, and to reinforce the program, do we need adult education to go along with it to reinforce it with the children? Then we need to look at that. It's probably one of the most important things we're going to do today because the amount of information going to our children today is coming like a fire hose from everywhere. I think I was told that by the age 10, they've received more information than I did in my lifetime. I'm 70 years old.
And not all of it's good.
And not all of it's good. And I believe...
How did you get interested in this, Representative?
Actually, I have a constituent who's a PhD in media literacy, and I sat down with her, and after about an hour, I had my mouth wide open going, oh my God.
Okay, and she'll be on tomorrow.
She'll be on,
Smith.
and she's unbelievable.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a question. One of our audience members wonders, what about people who don't have time to verify, to go through all this process? Shouldn't the government be playing a role here? What do you think about? I have an opinion, but I want to hear yours.
Oh, that's an awful dangerous one. I'm going to go, and it's contrary to the way people want to behave online because we're quick to share, right? It's real easy to share. Press the button. But that part needs verified too, right? We're especially quick to share those things which we already agree with, which our confirmation bias falls into. So I suppose if you don't have time to check, you don't have time to share, and that's a restriction that's going to be hard for people, to live with. My favorite with that is Herm Edwards on ESPN. Yeah. I'm telling the football recruits, right? Don't press send. Don't share. If you're not sure, don't share. because you just became a source. You just tied yourself to information that may or may not be correct. I'm very cautious online. I'll read online, but I'll very seldom share. Because in a lot of ways, as a small town teacher, whether you like it or not, some people look at you as a public figure. I don't want to share. I don't want people to assume that everything that I share is necessarily what I believe. And sometimes as a social studies teacher, I don't want everyone to know exactly what I believe, because it's not my job to indoctrinate, right? It's my job to share and to share in a different way, but my job to challenge students to think for themselves. And in that way, if you don't have time to verify, you shouldn't have time to share.
And if I could just add, the only profession that's protected in our Constitution in the First Amendment is the media, right? And it's because our founders recognized the importance of a free press, frankly, in holding government accountable, but holding institutions and ourselves accountable. And so to me, the ready solution is subscribe to your local newspaper. There are great national sources too. As we've discussed at length, Kathy, there are great kind of startups and digital outlets. Many of them take donations and have subscriptions. So that is the role of journalists. I know public's views of journalism have certainly been on the decline, just like we've seen with every other institution. But I still think there are thousands of journalists out there doing yeoman work and frankly scrutinizing institutions and society as part of their jobs. And yeah, frankly, we don't have the time to do that well, but there are reliable sources out there, and we should be consulting them. In fact, it's easier to access so many of those sources now than it ever was in the history of the world.
What do you think, Representative? Is there a role for government?
I think the original question was, should the government be involved? And with the dysfunction of government, I would say probably no, absolutely not. The government is there to protect speech, not to meld it, not to form it, not to tell you what to say or what not to say. Misinformation is still free. Our Constitution understood that in every part of our Constitution there are consequences of our speech, but they don't in any way say you can't do that other than fire in a theater. No, the government shouldn't do it, but we should be teaching our citizens how to self-govern on that, because that's how it's always been. There's always been misinformation. I mean, you can go back in history. There's always been, this news story or that news story that turned out to be false, but it actually, excuse me, formed the opinion of the world that day. But we don't stop that. We don't do away with our Constitution because people do hate speech or things like that. We condemn them. But the government really has no role in this other than to say, we need to teach our people better. We need to fund that maybe. We need to do all of those things. But it should not be up to the government to tell us what to think or what to say.
So we have a second question from a listener, viewer, that is a nice follow-up for this. What about the social media platforms? Do they have a role in tamping down some of this disinformation?
I actually think not.
Say it again?
I think not.
You think? Okay.
I think that if they're going to be an open forum, it should be an open forum. Because who's the truth detector here? What my truth is and what his truth is may be different. Although I can justify my truth, it would not be the same as his. It has to be in the eye of the beholder. We have to teach the people to understand what they're seeing. And put disclaimers on it. Say, this is an opinion piece. This is not a verified fact. I get that. But when you start saying that this person can say this and this person can't say that, now you've gotten into a totalitarian type situation where news is being controlled. We don't want controlled news in this country. We want open expression. So no, if they claim to have an open forum, it should be an open forum. I know it's ugly, but it's already ugly. It's ugly when they try to control it. It's ugly when they don't try to control it. But we're better off with a free expression of thought and ideas than we are the opposite of it. How many times have they said, well, you can't say this, and then you find out, well, it was really true. When the Post one of their articles was taken off of Facebook for being false, and turned out it wasn't. Who gets to decide that? The public gets to decide that, not individuals.
So another questioner asks, and I wanted to get to this topic, so I'm glad this question came up. What's the politics of this? And do people, particularly Representative Murphy, do you have, since you're pushing legislation, one of our questioners, and I know because he's done some news literacy work himself with our public library, sometimes has gotten pushback that, well, you're trying to get us to watch MSNBC. This is all a left-wing conspiracy. Have you heard any of that, and what's your response?
Well,
and I should say you're a Republican.
I'm a Republican, but no, I want them to watch MSNBC. I want them to watch everything and make up a legitimate opinion on both sides. We can't have them watching Fox News or MSNBC exclusively. I personally don't watch any of them. I turn them all off because I want my brain to decide what's right and wrong. I look at the facts. I don't listen to talking heads. And I think that's one of our problems. And journalism, I know, has a problem with the talking heads because all they do is show one side of it, and it's all slanted, and that is not how this is supposed to work. We're supposed to have a debate
I will say
on
that
real facts.
Cable news has become, at the prime time of cable news, has become opinions, just opinions, and not reported news stories. So I hear what you're saying.
It's conflicted,
yes.
though. People think it's news. It's not news. It's just opinion. And we've got to get beyond that.
Yeah, just like people think of everything they see on Facebook as news, as
right.
People are conflating social media with news media, and it's confusing because the news media does post on social media, but the New York Times is not the same as Cousin Vinny, right?
Right.
So.
And that goes to my point about an open forum. If you're going to have an open forum, you really have to have everybody saying what they want to say, and then you can work your way through it and decide.
So, Shawn, talk about the process in Illinois. What were the politics behind that? And then I'd like to hear from you again, Representative Murphy, on what you're hearing from your colleagues about this legislation.
Yeah, so I think the politics have shifted. So in 2015, when we worked on the high school civics law, and to a lesser extent 2019, feel like a different time in some respects. So our big hurdle, frankly, in those pushes was the unfunded mandate issue. And it was less to do with the polarization on how and what we teach when it comes to civics and news literacy, but those debates have become quite polarized. And I think you have to push through that because there is broad agreement that we need to do this. There's broad bipartisan agreement. The Heritage Foundation, which is a conservative think tank, right, came out with a study last year, and they found overwhelmingly that both parents and teachers think we should be paying more attention to this, particularly in high school. So what are the areas where we can find broad consensus? And there are legitimate arguments about what we teach and how we teach. And I think those, once again, as I said earlier, those arguments should play out at the local level. But the broad structure by which, yes, we should be taking civics classes in middle school and high school, and yes, media literacy shouldn't just be part of those classes, but frankly, as Jason and others have said, this should be embedded throughout the curriculum.
So what kind of things do you want people to learn from digital literacy, civics? What do you want them to come away from? Yeah, so
maybe just picking up on Representative Murphy's answer to the last question, because I could go a lot of different directions there. But I think a fundamental challenge in the current time is, how do we get news and information, right? When I first started teaching, Chicago Tribune every day would drop off a pile of newspapers, and that was how we did news literacy, right? We read those newspapers, and let's be honest here, the business class took the business section to look at stock reports, and many of the male students took the sports page, and they recycled the rest of the paper. But that's how I learned, was from a newspaper, and a good newspaper, a reputable newspaper that had vetted articles, had a good op-ed and editorial page, right? those still exist, but so few of us, even somebody who's a media junkie like myself, take a print newspaper on our doorstep anymore, right? So I am subscribed to a number of different sites, but you engage with information differently there. And so the challenge I see, I teach at the college level now, the challenge I see is how do you build that diverse media diet, right? And may involve the cable news shows, but how do we get that information that frankly we used to get maybe in a singular newspaper? The advantage, as I said, we have access to virtually every source in the world, right? So one thing I have my students do, and I found it's kind of taken the place maybe of a daily newspaper, is subscribing to something. We have a playbook in Illinois that Politico puts out. And they have some of their own content, but a lot of it's just aggregating. It's intelligent aggregation, right? It's aggregating other news stories, many of them relevant to the state and to the city. And I have my students, I said, every day I want you to read this top to bottom, and it takes 10 minutes maybe, and I want you to click on at least a couple of those articles, because they'll give you a paragraph or two from those articles. So maybe that is the equivalent in the modern era, but how do we cultivate this diverse news diet, and frankly this attentiveness? Like, I have this responsibility. Like, I feel like if I don't spend an hour with the news every day, something's missing in my diet, right? And how do we build those tendencies with students?
I think that's a great point. How do we convince people to add more whole grains into their information diet? Because right now, too many of us are eating Skittles, Hostess Ho-Hos, and Twinkies for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? And I want to ask you, Representative, and I see you want to jump in, Jason. Do you want to say something?
Well, I think that maybe the fundamental question is we have to make sure the students and adults know what news is. Well, and one of the fundamental questions I'll start with students is, how can you understand the message if you don't understand its purpose? Right? The students see things, or so many things are thrown at students and adults to look like news, but that's not their purpose. Advertising is snuck in that way, and entertainment is snuck in that way. Look at the Daily Show and Jon Stewart. It looks like a news show, and it behaves much unlike a news show, but it looks like one. And other things like that. Advertising's there. Propaganda's snuck in there. Influence is worked into things that look like news. And if students don't know how to discern what is actually news from everything else, then they don't know what to believe.
So you raise a really interesting point that this is what I wanted to ask the representative about. In a world, and I will, shameless self-advertisement, one of the videos on our site, our conference hub, is by me a little history of kind of how news has changed in the 40-plus years that I've been involved in this. And it's amazing. And one of the things that I talk about is the conflation of news and entertainment. And I just wonder, Representative, we see politicians on Dancing with the Stars. I don't know if you're lined up to do that.
No, absolutely
not.
But
do politicians now, I remember when I was first starting out in the news business, we would dutifully go cover the state legislative subcommittee on the secondary school education budget. And the story might not be on page one, but it was in there. Right. Now we know exactly how many people click on that story, and as opposed to the salacious story about the celebrity divorce. And it's pretty hard for news organizations to stay away from that clickbait. How has that put pressure on politicians? I mean, when you're trying to advance a substantive issue, do you feel like you have to wear a funny hat or something to get attention?
Personally, I don't. I have colleagues that, they absolutely play to the camera. And I think it's unfortunate that that they think they need to do that. It's normally for political gain to go somewhere else in the next election. But I don't think that. I think our biggest problem as far as the whole media literacy thing is nobody understands it. You asked what pushback I get from my colleagues. It's just they don't understand what it is that we're talking about. They honestly don't. They either think you're trying to push an agenda, or you're trying to get everybody to think as a right winger or a left winger, when really we're trying to teach people how to internalize things in such a way that it's healthy for us. Today we have a society that's like this, and it's driven mostly by social media. You know, we have got to learn that, for God's sake, stop, turn it off. That would be my number one thing. It's not, do I trust government? I don't trust any of it. Turn it all off. Go out in the woods for about a week and see how much better you feel not being barraged with all this negativity that you're seeing in the news, in the media, in advertising. Everything about today is about manipulating you. When you look at advertising today, they know what color font it is that's going to get you to react, and they'll send you a different color because they think you'll react differently. I mean, it has gotten to that point. We are not a country that needs to be manipulated. We need to be free-thinking people, and we got to get back to that. And I think part of the media literacy has got to be to free us from all the propaganda we're seeing, and I don't care if it's left, right, advertising, whether, to play video games. It's all of this is coming at us to try to make us to do things that we just wouldn't naturally do. We got to get back to being natural people again. Every time I go away and I go to the woods and I'm not around media for a while, I feel better. Isn't that a shame? Isn't that a shame?
Yes, and I think we have to, one of our later speakers will address this. I think we had a conference here when we were helping the Daniel Boone Library launch a media literacy program, and one of the community members who was involved in helping design that said, my friends they don't believe anything anymore. And the Tara Sussman-Pena, who will be with us later, said, and she's with iCivics, she said that's exactly what Vladimir Putin wants.
Right.
Yeah. Wants you to just say there's nothing to believe anymore. So I think getting people to understand that there's healthy skepticism, but if it veers into downright cynicism where we don't believe anybody, it is very dangerous. But making those distinctions is difficult.
Do you feel that we're on the edge of that?
Yes, I do.
And yeah. I do too. And that's why the media literacy bill that I'm putting forward to me is very important, because we have to start the process of getting back to normality. If people just believe everything they see or disbelieve everything they see, we're in a very sad place. And for the future of this country, we, honest to God, have to start teaching our children, our adults, ourselves, how to process this information and not internalize it. We shouldn't get mad every time we turn on the news. People do. I mean, they scream at their TV. We have to get way past that. And we're going to have to do it through education. And educators have to understand that too. It's not just don't bully on the internet.
One of the things I wanted to get back to, well, actually, I wanted to ask a question that kind of ties in with iCivics. It's one of our audience questions, and that is, we're focusing a lot here on young people because we're talking about education bills that would affect our elementary and secondary schools. But are they really the most vulnerable in this scenario, do you think? Are our young people the most vulnerable, or are we, some of us older folks, equally, if not more vulnerable? And if so, how do we deal with that?
Well, the data suggests that actually the older you are, the more vulnerable you are. I would say we also need to get it right with young people, because they're going to be around a long time, and they're the future, right? And frankly, we have, to Representative Murphy's point, we have an education system with at least the potential to do that, right? It's much more difficult to do this with adult audiences. One place in my former role, I was asked that question by a board member of mine at the McCormick Foundation. Said, "This is all great, this media literacy work you're doing in K-12, but what about old geezers like me? And we need it too." There was a program that the New America Foundation ran in Maryland called the Librarians as Media Mentors, and we gave a grant to New America to replicate that program in a couple big library systems in the Chicago area, where librarians can kind of serve that role. Now, granted, everybody doesn't go to a library, but it is a place where adults do engage. So I think there are probably options beyond that. The American Library Association has similarly embraced media literacy as something they do as part of their public programming. But yeah, beyond libraries, I think we need to think hard about how we can still foster media literacy. You asked Jason a question before about parents and what role parents can play. And we actually, there's a study that was done of this program called Kids Voting USA, which involved young people following the news about the presidential election and actually going home and talking to their parents about it. And what they found a year after the study was not only were the students still actively following news about politics, but their parents were. So there's even something in our school system.
I do think this intergenerational project has real potential. I did a program a couple of years ago for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute here, which is part of the Missouri Extension Service. And it was mostly older people because that's who the Osher audience is. And I shared some tools with some of the audience, and I said, now take these and play with these. Some of them are games, like the University of Washington has a Can You Spot the Fake? Which face is real? But talking about composite photos. And I think it might have been that game. But I shared it and I said, now you might play this with your kids or your grandkids. And in between, it was a multi-week class, and in between sessions, I got a very excited phone call from one of the Osher learners who said, I'm so excited. And I said, why is that? And she said, my granddaughter is texting me.
Wow.
And she said normally she couldn't even get the granddaughter on the phone, but now, of course, people of a certain age we know don't use phones for actual voice calls, but they were playing this game together, and the young person got very excited, and she and Grandma were at a big text stream about which one do you think is real, and so I do think there's really an opportunity if we engage young people to engage the older people in their lives.
That ties into the Civics bill in Illinois, where one of the things we require is service learning. And in the Illinois Civics Hub, we're always pushing the idea that you want student buy-in, you want to create it as a student-generated interest to make it authentic. But that does sound like the potential is there to once teach the students, now teach the students to teach others. And then it becomes a service learning component, which is tied to the Illinois Civics bill. When you take the extension from the classroom, what you're learning in the classroom, you extend it onto a larger audience. That ties directly in, the digital media literacy component of the classroom spreading to the community. And that is using the education system. But it requires some of those things to be there in order for some people to take a look at it. The creative can find that, and they have the opportunity to do so, but sometimes need to push in the right direction. And it's having to teach digital literacy and having to teach service learning, and now they become one. And that is your way to reach the community in a system, at least in Illinois, where we've got it built in. That doesn't mean it's happening in a lot of cases, but it means the opportunity is there, and that's our job, is to help people see the opportunity and encourage them to take it.
We're coming up to the top of the hour, so I just want to, before we break, give each of you a chance to provide a closing thought. Anything you want people to take away from this session, or a to-do list. What should people be doing going forward? So I'll start with you, Representative.
Yeah, I just want to say that I believe that media literacy is probably the topic of our time. And we talk about education and being responsible for it. I think it's crossed over now. I think not only is it an education problem, but I think it's also a mental health problem. We see how children today are reacting from the information they're getting and the way they're taking that out. School shootings and things like that are becoming more prevalent, and I believe that has a lot to do with how they're internalizing information they're receiving. So I hope that we take this serious and not just say, well, you're trying to push an agenda, or you're trying to add more things to a school teacher that has way too many things to do. They're now social service people and everything else, and I get all that, but that doesn't mean we have to ignore this. I think we need to move forward. I think we have to understand that this is a very, very important topic for the survival of this country, frankly.
Shawn?
So I think as we move policies to strengthen media literacy instruction, it's really critical that we resource implementation. And to me, the secret sauce of this is always teacher training, teacher professional development. Right. It takes money to do that. It's important those opportunities happen throughout a big state like Missouri. My experience in Illinois is the parts of the state outside of the Chicago area are very underserved with respect to that. So resource implementation doesn't always have to be public money for that. You can raise the private dollars for that, but make sure that teachers have training opportunities at scale.
Jason?
Make sure our students know what's the purpose of information. Not only where's it coming from, but why does someone want me to think this? And then that should lead to a curiosity and an uncovering and a self-discovery where we can start to sort what is true.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you so much for coming. I really want to, especially all of you had to do a little bit of driving or flying to get to Columbia, Missouri for this event, so I really want to thank you for being here. I want to thank everybody in our audience for listening, and to remind you that our next session will be at the top of the next hour at 11 a.m. Central Time if you want to participate live. You can come back to our site anytime, the Conference Hub, to see the sessions, review the sessions. We have Representative Murphy's bill on the site, so you can take a look at that. And I'll try to add some of the other resources that were mentioned in today's talk. And then we will be continuing our sessions online throughout the week, so check out the schedule and come back and see us. If you can't make a session, you can see us at a different time. You can email questions, and you can email follow-up questions. I'm a reporter, so I'm all for follow-ups, to newsliteracy@missouri.edu, and we will try to get your questions to our speakers, who I think will be very willing to answer. So come back and join us again. And I want to thank our director, Travis McMillan, and our producer, Taylor Freeman, for helping us with this session. And we will see you at the next one, 11 a.m. CDT. Thanks.